how can we deal in a democratic manner with some of the most hazardous sort of materials that we've ever created in the history of humanity, that is nuclear waste. And Catharina is therefore an associate professor and head of Science, Technology and Society Division at Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden. Her research focuses on environmental risk management with a particular emphasis on issues related to nuclear waste, as I was just saying. She's the author of Environmental Participation, Practices Engaging the Public with Science and Governance, published by Palgrave Macmillan. And she's a regular contributor to leading scientific journals such as Futures and Social Studies of Science. As you can see, the notion of public consultation with this kind of hazardous wastes is a key issue, and so that makes really a very interesting transition with the former talk. We're so grateful that you're here with us today, Catharina, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. So I'm going to talk about something slightly more depressing than the previous speaker. So my field is science and technology studies, which means that I'm working on contemporary issues, so I'm not that used to being historical, but I have been as historical as I can, given my previous work here. So what I'm going to talk about today is, well, first I will give you a backdrop to explain where I'm coming from to this topic. Then I'm going to tell you briefly about what I'm talking about when I'm saying geological disposal of nuclear waste. And then I'll explain what I think geological disposal as a discourse might mean. And it's a delight to be able to speak to you here today, and I hope I won't be too depressing. So, a backdrop. Well, when Martin invited me, I did have a bit of a flashback, because although I might not be working on geological disposal today, I did so in 2011 to 2014. I was in a research project at the University of East Anglia in the UK. It was called INSOTEC, International Socio-Technical Challenges for the Implementing Geological Disposal, and it was funded by the 7th Framework Euratom program. So I met a lot of people actually trying to implement geological waste. We did a comparison of 14 countries. I worked in work package 1, doing a review of national and international radioactive waste management. And in addition to numerous reports to the EU, I'm sure you recognize that fact if you ever worked with the EU funding, we actually also produced a paper where we started to look at a long-term repository governance from the perspective of local communities hosting such a waste facility. And this was an incredibly speculative paper, because revisiting this now, I see that when we did this paper in 2015, geological disposal was very close to being implemented, as they said. It's still not happening. It's still not there. Finland is supposed to be closest. They started in 2004. In 2015, they got a license to build a repository. They made a decision in 2019 to apply for an operating license, and they submitted the operating license in 2024. And I'm now citing the blokes down there, the Posiva implementers, not big on diversity. The final disposal, what they wrote last year was the final disposal of spent nuclear fuel by Posiva is scheduled to start in the mid-2020s. That would be now. The exact start date, though, has not yet been set, but we are getting closer every day. We are getting closer every day. That is something that they have said since the 1970s. Policymakers, politicians, scientists, engineers have develop a tendency to talk about geological disposal as if it is an existing fact. They did this in 2011 when I started working with it, and they do that today. It's always, always very, very near. So what is it that is very, very near? Well, geological disposal of nuclear waste is described by the World Nuclear Association website as a reasonable way of going ahead, because the long time scales over which some waste remain radioactive has led to the idea of deep disposal in underground repositories in stable geological formations. Isolation is provided by a combination of engineered and natural barriers, rock, salt, clay, and no obligation to actively maintain the facility is passed on to future generations. It's an image from the Swedish implementer here, which is creating the system that the Finns will use, and places the waste first in a copper canister, and then in bentonite clay, and then deeply in the ground. It's actually a rather simple idea: package it and bury. However, the history of geological disposal is long and not so successful. So the idea came from a US report published in 1957, and note here that what it says towards the end, they judged geological disposal to be the safest method for disposal of high-level wastes in advance of research and in the absence of essential data. In the 1970s, geological disposal emerged as the preferred policy solution, and many national programs for implementation followed. In the 1980s, siting programs were initiated, and they encountered major public opposition. In the 1990s, they shifted to voluntary siting processes. In the 2000s, they had some negotiations and demonstration projects. In the 2010s, some countries were able to do some siting decisions. And in the 2020s, we have some construction starting and some applications for permits. Now, I have called this history writing as crafting a narrative of success from a history of failure, because this is not a history of success. It's quite ongoing, and so where are we today? Well, actually, when we're near again, I took the IAEA from 2022 that says several countries have had to restart their site selection process for a deep geological repository, having not been successful in gaining public support, to say the least. Proposed timelines for the operation of DGRs vary from country to country, but to date, the estimated soonest and latest year for opening DGRs are 2024 and 2160, respectively. Well, it's obviously not going to be 2024. Finland started construction in June 2024. Sweden started construction in January 2025. France has submitted an application for starting construction, or will be last year. So after 69 years of work, there is no materialization of this technical solution. In actuality, the Finnish one in Onkalo will be the first full-scale experiment of its kind whenever emplacement starts, if it does. So this is why I started to think, okay, we're talking about this, we're talking about this, we're talking about this, we're doing research, what should I call it? How should I think about it? Well, as discourse. If I think about it as discourse, and discourse is being a way of organizing knowledge that structures the constitution of social relations through the collective understanding of the discursive logic and the acceptance of the discourse as a social fact. then what it looks like is this. From 1957 until today, we have a vision. We have this drawing. And we have a reality, which is written reports, immense amounts of written reports and innumerable research activities, but no actual realization of that vision. Now, thinking about geological disposal as discourse, I am very interested in thinking about what does this involve? What are the foundational beliefs? So I found the notion of core ideas, so looking into business research, actually, and it was explained as just as individual leaders have inner beliefs steering their choices, so too do groups and organizations. The shared assumptions get passed down over years through habits, policies, legends, and corporate mantras. They solidify into the way things are done around here until nobody bothers asking why anymore, if they ever did. And yet today's business realities may require questioning everything we take for granted about how to operate, adapt, and succeed. So this, I think, fitted quite well to the discourse of geological disposal. So I was looking for what kind of core beliefs are we? Well, I found three very central beliefs here. Well, firstly, that nature is stable. Secondly, that society adheres to long-term plans. And thirdly, that communication can be independent of culture. And then I set out to examine and challenge these ideas from an STS perspective. So first, nature is stable. I again want to cite the IAEA that says geological disposal facilities for long-lived waste will provide passive multi-barrier isolation of radioactive materials. Emplacement in carefully engineered structure buried deep within suitable geological formations provides the long-term stability typical of a stable geological environment. Countries that need to dispose of their spent fuel and a high-level waste are studying different available geological media for it. I'm not going into depth in this, but one might notice that there is a tension between having your stable geological environment and digging a hole in it. I have no idea whether this will matter, but from an STS perspective, I'm just thinking that it might. But also the idea that the Earth is inherently stable might not necessarily feel so well-founded. I mean, earthquakes happen in many places. That might not necessarily be the biggest risk here, but earthquakes and the movement of the Earth's crust changes the way water moves, and water is a problem here. Water creates corrosion, and corrosion is not good when you have emplaced something in metal or copper or whatever. Even the Americans trying to dig a hole in Yucca Mountain in the middle of the desert had problems with the water. Water is an issue. If we look at the second idea, that future society will follow the plan. Well, you can see here that the Swedish implementer hopes to be able to start work on construction in the 2020s and reckons that the spent fuel repository can then be ready to start operations about 10 years later. When canisters are being positioned in the Finnish tunnels, new ones will be blasted. This will go on for about 40 years until all the nuclear fuels is in place. Then the repository will be sealed. When fully developed, sometime in the 2080s, it's going to be closed down. So there is about 60 years projected in this context. Other implementers project up to 175 years until closure. But what's the likelihood that the great-grandchildren of today's policy people will remain committed to this activity that costs an enormous amount of money and may not actually bring any benefits? The world is littered by abandoned mega projects. So mega projects that tend to run into both economic and political problems that basically dissolves the organizations responsible. And built in very remote locations, these geological disposal facilities might very well be abandoned long before completion. And so there's not much to support the idea that the projects started today will be completed. The third idea, that you can communicate beyond culture, brought me to look up this field called atomic semiotics or nuclear semiotics that has evolved as an interdisciplinary field of semiotics which studies potential uses of long-term nuclear waste warning messages. It is concerned with labeling radioactive waste to deter human intrusion at nuclear waste repositories in the future. Now, the question is whether you can actually tell future humans not to dig up hazardous waste. I mean, it's prompted an entire field of research. However, evidence might not be very strong for the possibility of this. The Egyptian hieroglyphs became readable when archaeologists found the Rosetta Stone. That was basically a translation into a known language. Now, the Egyptian hieroglyphs were less than, 7,000 years old. The thingy, the strange symbol on the right here, nobody knows what it is. And that is sort of way, way younger than the 100,000 years that they try to communicate the dangers of nuclear fuels buried in the ground. So there is not really anything that supports the idea that it would be remotely possible to communicate across such a long time. Probably communication actually do need an ongoing culture, like the Australian Aborigines who can read the signs on the wall because they've had an actual culture going on for 40,000 years. That helps. We are not going to last 40,000 years. So there were some doubts about the key core ideas in geological disposal discourse. And to bring this to a close, I will explain what I mean by distortive lock-in. So what I'm thinking here is that the stability of this idea since 1957, this is policy planning and projects. It's based in a very untested discourse. There's been no unsettling confrontation with the reality that matters to the implementer. The only confrontations they've had with reality has stopped the projects because that's been with how people react to the building of facilities or the siting of facilities close by, and that stopped it for like 30 years or something. I think this is an excellent example of path dependency. In 1957, they said, let's start look at this as one of other options, and then no other options have not been pursued. That's just where, and that is where I arrive at the idea of lock-in. So in the context we are in today, I think this is like a warning for how easy it is to get really, really firmly attached to one idea that would work if just the world were as you wanted it to be. Thank you so very much for listening.
Thank you, Catharina, for this talk that definitely goes against any form of wishful thinking, but also draws very interesting parallels with what archaeology is actually doing. Like how will you be described by future generation? It's in a way not a new question, and you're here taking maybe the scariest example it can be, which is like how future generation will understand that there is a nuclear waste disposal here. Are there some questions for Catharina? Des questions qu'on peut traduire, Thomas?
But I have, I think, everyone's obvious question. We thought this was already happening. Where is the waste going right now?
It's, well, it's sitting in intermediate storage. I thought, when I started working on this in 2011, I thought this was already happening. Many people have thought that this is already happening for a long, long time.
And how is the intermediate storage working? Yeah, how intermediate is the intermediate storage? But that must be a long answer.
Well, it's getting longer. It was supposed, the intermediate storage was built fairly near either nuclear power plants or reprocessing facilities. In sort of waiting for geological disposal to be realized. They started building these intermediate storages in the 1980s with the idea that soon we will have sited this and we'll put it on the ground. But everywhere it's still in intermediate storage.
Just to follow up, is it the same story in Japan, the same story in the US, the same story everywhere? Or is it a European story? This kind of thing's taking forever?
Well, the countries who are, this is for the countries involved in the IAEA, International IAEA, whatever it's called, International Atomic Energy Association, IAEA. IAEA, it's called. And those countries, we, of course, do not know if countries with, let's say, less open communication has done anything else. But I think we can be pretty sure that they haven't, because if they've succeeded, they would have told. Because then they would have succeeded with something that the democratic countries cannot do. And also, this waste is traced. You can see it from space. It's very radioactive. It glows at night and at day and all the time.
Thank you, Catharina. Is there any other question? Amita, you have a question. I will come to you.
This is also just an informational question. To what extent is this factor about the problem of storing radioactive waste that's going to remain toxic for thousands of years important in the debate on nuclear energy in Europe in the context of the move towards renewables?
I have been very, very surprised that nobody has mentioned this issue. As nuclear waste seems to, or nuclear power seems to be going through a renaissance, because most of the host communities volunteering to have a geological disposal facility has made very clear that they would not be open to having this, getting new nuclear waste in. It's sort of, yes, so if in Sweden, for example, we do have an agreement. They started construction, but the community were very, very clear in saying that we will be supporting bringing the waste that exists now into this facility and then close it. And that's basically what all potential host communities have said. So it's going to be, if they go ahead with building new nuclear, they're going to have a serious blowback on the waste issue, because then they won't be able to bury any waste because the host communities will pull out of their previous commitment as well.
Thank you, Catharina. And maybe just to finish briefly, it's really not a brief question at all, actually, and we already addressed it, but you touch upon the notion of discourse around the nuclear, but there's also a very important aesthetic question, aesthetic not in the sense of pretty, but in the sense of making oneself sensitive to an issue, which is that in the collective representation, nuclear as a potential problem does exist, and there's a tradition of like apocalyptic landscape and so on. There's not so much of that around the energy that is taking over right now, that is coal. And so how interested are you in actually the problems that coal also creates?
Sorry?
Coal. Now, coal is like killing people every year. Like there's a massive problem of people getting suffocated by coal as a use of energy. And somehow this representation of something that is really an enemy too, it doesn't seem to reach people's mind as much as a nuclear explosion or the problem of waste disposal. How do you address that very question?
I have no idea. It's really unpredictable of how to what reaches people and what doesn't reach people, and what kind of responses you get on a discursive level. It is very unpredictable, and I think one of the things is that when it comes to the discourse on this particular issue, science and politics have been in absolute agreement because they haven't, it's a very attractive solution because it brings an end to the issue, or at least it sounds as if it brings an end to an issue. Many other issues and problems can't come up with something that even resembles an end, a final solution or whatever. So I think this is an important issue when you're trying to.
So that's a very beautiful way of, very interesting way of trapping this into the discursive problems that you were mentioning. Thank you so much. Thank you, Catharina.